I think the reality is that, what the ecosystem at large saw in 2020 and 2021 was an extremely generous financing market. And what we're seeing now for the last sort of 18, 24 months. So I see an increasingly important role, for M&A in the ecosystem. I also see the potential of consolidation. And what I mean by that is, two peers in a particular sector that may be, extremely fragmented and oversupplied. You have to look at M&A as an extremely strategic decision that is done for many reasons and takes a very long time.
Hello and welcome to a very special podcast series, Unusual Suspects. I'm your host, Gaurav Chaudhary. This is a series about unraveling stories of entrepreneurs, investors and businesses, and of course professionals who are disruptors yet not in your face. Their disruptions have consistently delivered on the purpose and the mission they've embarked on. Their values are as strong as the mission. While they are ruthless in pursuing their ambition, they don't stray from being leaders who are not just admired for the vision and relentless pursuit, but also how they're building an ecosystem of believers who consistently push the boundaries. They allow principles to take precedence over ad hocism. For them, profitability is as important as scale, creating and leading new categories and innovations. In each episode, I speak to one such leader, talking to her or him or them about their businesses, lives, inspirations, interests, challenges, pivot moments and turning points, successes, failures, agonies, and ecstasies, and of course the little joys. It is as much about their personal life stories as about their entrepreneurial and professional journeys. Unusual Suspect streams on Earshot.in, Spotify.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, MoneyControl.com, and a host of other podcast streaming platforms. For this episode, I'm delighted to have Anuj Bhargava, Managing Director and Head of Corporate Development for India and Southeast Asia at Lightspeed India, a leading venture capital company. Anuj works very closely with founders on strategic and financing transactions across the Lightspeed portfolio, advising them on fundraising, M&A and ESG strategy, while building and maintaining institutional investor relationships that enable companies on their journey from venture to growth to finally public markets. An alum of the Doon School and the London School of Economics and Political Science, Anuj is also responsible for managing the fund's liquidity needs and strategic exits, thereby crystallizing value for all stakeholders. Welcome to Unusual Suspects, Anuj. Delighted to have you here.
Thank you, Gaurav. Pleasure to be here and really look forward to this conversation.
Okay, Anuj, a question that is dominating everyone's mind. Has the funding winter ended, or are we close to ending of the funding winter, or is it going to last for this winter too? Anuj?
It's a great question, Gaurav, and we get asked this all the time. I think the reality is that what the ecosystem at large saw in 2020 and 2021 was an extremely generous financing market. And what we're seeing now for the last sort of 18, 24 months is the market return to more normalized levels. So I'd say funding is certainly slower than the 2 years I mentioned to you, but I think it's in line with what we saw before the pandemic. So I'd say it's really a reversion to more normal market conditions. On the early stage side, which form a bulk of our investments in India and Southeast Asia, we've been extremely active. I think writing upwards of 13 or 14 new checks. And on the growth side, of course, things are a little bit slower. But I'd say one thing, right? For good companies, there never is a funding winter. They always find the right pockets of capital. And that's what we're seeing these days.
Anuj, on a lighter note, we also call ourselves to be a good company, but that's a conversation I'll have with you at some point later. The question here is, what is the role of M&As in the startup ecosystem? Do you think from seed to an M&A to eventually a public. How does the journey look like for most of your portfolio companies?
Yeah, look, I think we see a lot of potential for M&A in the Indian startup ecosystem. If I take a step back, look, India historically has never been an M&A dominant market like the US or even to a certain extent Europe. Just to give you an anecdote, I used to be in London for 20 years as a investment banker doing a lot of M&A, and India was historically a market that didn't see a lot of transactions, but I think that is changing and will change going forward as well. I think private equity as well as the large strategic players in India will be more acquisitive. On the new age economy side, I think some of the large companies that have been formed over the last 5-7 years are also being acquisitive. I think we will see companies from abroad come up and buy Indian startups as well. We've had at least a couple of examples in our portfolio, both names like Rev and Rephrase that we've sold recently to large blue chip US tech companies. So I see an increasingly important role for M&A in the ecosystem. I also see the potential of consolidation, and what I mean by that is two peers in a particular sector that may be extremely fragmented and oversupplied coming together and consolidating and forming a larger company that is much healthier to operate versus two companies operating standalone.
Yeah, Anuj, have you seen a growth in M&A since the funding winter started? And we are probably talking about time span of about 2 years now. How do you think the investment sectors are panning out in India?
Look, so I think, Gaurav, we expected M&A to dominate a little bit more during, the funding winter because, as companies that are unable to attract capital would naturally look for alternative solutions, and M&A is obviously one solution. And as I mentioned to you, we've seen some examples of it. But I'd say, look, a lot of companies have also been in the mode of conserving cash and not spending on inorganic growth or M&A. And sometimes there's a bit of a lag between the funding drying out and founders and companies realizing that they need to do alternative transactions like M&A, and I think we're in that lag period. But I think, look, in 2024 and going forward, we're pretty certain that we'll see a lot more M&A that we have probably not seen in the last 12, 18 months.
And, when do you decide that it's the right time or the right opportunity? What are the key determinants of that process, Anuj?
So, Gaurav, I think it's a very interesting question, but one that can be answered in many ways, right? I think you have to look at M&A as a extremely strategic decision that is done for many reasons and takes a very long time, right? So you could do it because you'd rather buy something than build it yourself because it may be cheaper sometimes to buy it. You may be doing it, because you want to expand into a new product area, or if you want to expand into a new geography. You may be doing it because, as I mentioned earlier, there's a couple of, peer companies or competitors coming together to create a much more efficient, larger company. So there's multiple reasons, you do an M&A transaction. It's almost always with the view to create value by coming together, either by increasing your scale and your product and geographical footprint, as well as your ability to sell things at a higher price, or by cutting costs and creating value that way. So there's always, an interesting synergy. It's always a strategic decision that's taken by, the CEO and the board. And it always takes a very long time because, you need to build relationships, you need to scout the market, you need to find the right opportunity, you need to pay the right price, and you need to then ensure that the target that you're buying is very well integrated into your existing company, both financially as well as culturally. So look, it's a very important decision. It's one that's always taken at the highest level and with a lot of factors. And part of our job here is to advise our founders to make the correct decision, Gaurav.
And which other sectors are you witnessing the most of the M&A deals coming through in, say, the last 2 years? And why in these sectors, Anuj?
So I think, look, M&A is, I'd say it's pretty sector agnostic, but, in our portfolio, if I start with that, we've seen quite a few deals, initially on the fintech side. I think that's been a little bit more quiet recently, owing to changes in the regulatory environment that everyone's waiting to settle down. We've seen the two examples I gave you of sales in the enterprise and software sector. I think that's always very interesting because there's not that many companies that are available for sale, and foreign buyers find Indian SaaS companies extremely attractive because you've got a great product normally and sort of good talent, and it's always good to have an engineering base in India. So enterprise software has seen a lot of transactions. I think commerce, we've had a few situations where there's been M&A in commerce transactions, both on the logistics side as well as just B2B commerce. I think consumer and healthcare have been relatively slower on the new age side, and I expect them to pick up together with EdTech in 2024.
What are the attraction levels of Indian startups? Are they attractive enough to be bought over by global majors, Anuj?
I think so. Gaurav, we're seeing some of it, and we're going to see more of it. As I mentioned to you, we've had two examples in our portfolio, where we've had large US publicly listed companies come and buy Indian startups. And we think that, that is something that obviously we're able to offer to our founders, the global connectivity, and in particular in the US, which, differentiates us versus some of the other early stage investors. And, I think that trend will continue because, Indian companies and founders are really building world-class products for the world. And they're building it in India and, really for the world. And, we're big investors on, this whole China plus one or India for the world thematic. And we've got lots of investments, into companies that start in India, and then really sort of migrate to a more global, US focused, customer base. And once that happens, Gaurav, automatically, global buyers get more attracted because, you're serving clients in their region. You could be serving competitors. You could be even serving them. And the more of that we see, which historically we've seen, in enterprise software, but now we're seeing in B2B commerce as well. The more of that trend we see, and the trend being, building in India for the world, the more Indian startups will become attractive to global companies.
And can you share a few M&A examples that you have been part of, you've been part of, or you have seen and think were great wins overall, Lightspeed or any other, Anuj?
Yeah, happy to share, all the public stuff. And there's obviously, as you can appreciate, some in the works that I might not be able to give details just yet. But look, in, last year, we sold a fintech company called Setu to Pine Labs. We sold a e-commerce company called LimeRoad to Remart. We sold a SaaS company called Rev to LegalZoom, which is a US public company. And we've sold Rephrase, which is a generative AI company with, video technology, to a very, very large blue chip US company that, is unnamed, publicly, but, we've recently sort of closed that transaction as well. So these are, four transactions that I've personally been involved in over the last 18 months. And there's many others in the works where either, a buyer is coming in to buy, the full company, and all these examples have been of 100% sale, but there's also been one or two examples in our portfolio where a strategic partner has come in with a large stake, upfront, with a plan maybe to buy more later. And there are a few in the works for that category as well, Gaurav.
And Anuj, do you think that there is a risk of threat of monopolization if global big tech companies start buying Indian tech startups? Will it create barriers to entry for budding Indian tech startups? What's your view on this, Anuj?
No, look, I don't think so. I think it's a good thing for the ecosystem at large, Gaurav, if large US tech companies are finding the right technology, the product and talent in the Indian ecosystem to buy. So I don't see it as a monopolistic risk. I think governments in every country have the right barriers to ensure that doesn't happen. I think India needs more M&A, both strategic and financial sponsor-driven M&A. It's a very vibrant and large market in the US, and India needs to do that as well. So I actually welcome big tech and other technology companies and other global companies coming into India and really validating our founders and our companies and buying them and putting them as part of their larger networks that can then help create further value for everyone.
And finally, Anuj, what's your outlook particularly in the M&A landscape over the next 1 or 2 years, particularly in 2024? Are you seeing bullish trends emerging over the horizon, Anuj?
Extremely positive on India in particular, because we think it's a very unique blend of fundamentals and other factors such as political stability, policy stability, and frankly, relative to other investment destinations, India continues to stand out. If you look at China or Europe or even parts of the US. So I think India will continue to benefit from those macro tailwinds. I think both for M&A and for equity markets, 2024 is going to be a more positive year. We will continue to see more IPOs. The equity markets remain very attractive, and the interest rates are stable, Gaurav, and what that means is people can borrow money at reasonable levels and their equities are priced very well, which is always a good sign to do more M&A.
Yeah, thanks, Anuj. It's good to hear that. Good to hear about bullish prospects in the next 1 year. Everyone, from the business baron to the person on the street, is hoping that things will be better next year. And coming from a person like you who's been tracking the investment activity in the startup space and otherwise also in the broader economy, this is something very soothing to hear. Thank you so much, Anuj, for taking the time out and dropping by to have this conversation with us and sharing your deep insights and perspective. Thank you so much, Anuj.
Lovely. Thank you for having me, Gaurav. Thank you very much.